Blood, betrayal, and a billion-dollar secret do not usually hide behind the peeling paint of an abandoned clock shop. When 32-year-old Oliver Hayes inherited his grandfather's debt-ridden store, his family laughed. They took the liquid cash. He took the dust. But they never realized what was ticking beneath the floorboards. The mahogany-paneled office of Harrison Finch, attorney at law, smelled of expensive scotch and impending disappointment. Outside the towering windows, the grey Philadelphia rain battered the glass, matching the grim atmosphere inside the room. Oliver Hayes sat rigid in a leather wingback chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Across from him sat his older brother, David, casually checking his luxury watch, and his sister, Chloe, who was already browsing real estate listings on her phone. Their grandfather, Benjamin Hayes, had been a notoriously eccentric man. He was a master horologist, a man who preferred the company of gears, mainsprings, and ticking pendulums over his own flesh and blood. However, he had also been incredibly wealthy, or so the family thought. For decades, Benjamin had quietly amassed a fortune, living frugally while his investments skyrocketed. Today was the day the spoils were to be divided. Finch cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "To my eldest grandson, David," the lawyer read, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. "I leave the estate in upstate New York, along with the portfolio managed by Vanguard." David smirked, a quiet breath of relief escaping his lips. "To my granddaughter, Chloe, I leave the liquid assets held in the Cayman accounts, totaling slightly over $4 million, and the summer home in Cape Cod." Chloe didn't even look up from her phone, merely tapping a manicured nail against the screen in acknowledgement. Oliver leaned forward. He was the youngest, the black sheep, a failed architect, drowning in student loans and crushed by a recent eviction. Oliver desperately needed a lifeline. He didn't need millions, just enough to clear his debts and start over. He had actually loved the old man, spending summers in his grandfather's cramped workshop, while David and Chloe were off at sailing camps. "And finally," Finch said, pausing as he looked over the rim of his glasses directly at Oliver, "to my youngest grandson, Oliver, I leave the entirety of the property and business known as Hayes & Sons Antiquities, located at 42 Alderney Street, along with all its physical contents." Silence hung in the room. David let out a sudden, barking laugh. "The shop," David sneered. "That condemned rat trap in the warehouse district? Grandpa really did have a twisted sense of humor." Oliver felt the blood drain from his face. "Just the shop? Are there any operational funds? A trust to cover the property taxes?" Finch offered a sympathetic, tight-lipped smile. "I'm afraid not, Oliver. In fact, there is an outstanding lien on the property for back taxes amounting to $42,000. If it is not paid within the next 30 days, the city will seize the building. Your grandfather's exact words in his addendum were, 'Oliver will know what to do with the time he is given.'" Oliver walked out of the law office into the freezing rain, his inheritance feeling like an anvil dropped onto his chest. He was officially the owner of a rotting building and a massive debt. 2 hours later, Oliver stood before 42 Alderney Street. It was a narrow 3-story brick building squeezed between two modern, towering glass apartment complexes. The neighborhood had gentrified aggressively, leaving Benjamin's shop looking like a decaying tooth in a perfect, expensive smile. The faded gold-leaf lettering on the dirty glass window barely read Hayes & Sons Antiquities. He unlocked the front door with a heavy, rusted iron key Finch had given him. The bell above the door chimed, a weak, dissonant sound. The air inside was suffocating, smelling of oxidized brass, dried oil, and decades of undisturbed dust. Shadows clung to the corners, hiding hundreds of clocks. Grandfather clocks, cuckoo clocks, mantle clocks, all silent. It was a graveyard of time. "It's worse than I remembered," Oliver muttered to himself, stepping over a collapsed pile of rotted wooden casings. Before he could even find the light switch, the front door swung open again. A man in a sharp, bespoke charcoal suit stepped in, wrinkling his nose in immediate disgust. He looked entirely out of place among the grime. "Oliver Hayes, I presume?" the man said, his voice slick and polished. "Who's asking?" Oliver replied, defensive. "Victor Grayson. I represent Caldwell Holdings." Grayson handed Oliver a crisp, embossed business card. Richard Caldwell was the biggest real estate developer on the East Coast, known for aggressively buying up historic blocks and bulldozing them into luxury shopping centers. "I'll cut right to the chase, Mr. Hayes. We know your grandfather just passed. My condolences. We also know about the tax lien. The city is going to take this hazardous waste dump in a month." Oliver crossed his arms. "Get to the point. The point is, you're drowning, and I'm offering you a life raft," Grayson said, smiling like a shark. "Caldwell Holdings will assume the debt and give you $50,000 in cash today. You walk away clean. We bulldoze this eyesore by Tuesday." Oliver looked around the shop. 50,000 would wipe out his personal debts. It was the logical, easy way out. But something bothered him. The towering glass buildings on either side belonged to Caldwell Holdings. Why hadn't his grandfather sold when they built those? Benjamin could have named his price. And why was Grayson here literally hours after the will reading? The ink on the legal documents wasn't even dry yet. 50,000 for a prime commercial lot in the center of the Alderney district? Oliver countered, his architectural background kicking in. "The dirt beneath our feet is worth 10 times that." "You're lowballing me, Grayson." Grayson's smile vanished. "The building is structurally compromised. It's a tear down, and you don't have the capital to fight the city. Take the money, Hayes. If you don't, we'll just buy it from the city at auction next month for a fraction of what I'm offering you, and you walk away with absolutely nothing." "Get out," Oliver said, his voice low but firm. "You're making a massive mistake," Grayson sneered, turning toward the door. "You have 30 days, kid. I'll be seeing you." When the door slammed shut, Oliver was left alone in the silence. He had just turned down $50,000 out of pure, stubborn pride. He ran a hand through his damp hair, feeling a surge of panic. He needed to find something in this shop worth selling, and fast. For the next 3 days, Oliver practically lived in the shop. He bought a cheap mattress, set it up in the cramped back office, and began the grueling process of inventorying his grandfather's life. Most of it was junk, rusted springs, cracked porcelain faces, and water-damaged mahogany casings. He managed to sell a few decent mantel clocks to a local pawn shop for enough cash to buy groceries and keep the electricity on. But he was nowhere near the $42,000 he needed. On the evening of the 4th day, Oliver decided to tackle the basement. The wooden stairs groaned in protest as he descended into the darkness, a heavy flashlight in his hand. The basement was surprisingly dry, but packed floor to ceiling with wooden crates. As he pulled away, a heavy, moth-eaten canvas tarp in the center of the room, his flashlight beam caught the dull gleam of polished brass. Oliver paused, wiping away a thick layer of grime. Beneath the tarp sat a massive object, roughly the size of a small writing desk. It wasn't a clock. It was an automaton. Constructed of exquisite dark walnut and intricate brass gearing, the machine depicted a life-sized mechanical boy sitting at a desk, a quill pen clutched in its segmented metallic hand. The craftsmanship was staggering, unlike anything Oliver had ever seen. The boy's face was made of painted porcelain, its glass eyes staring blankly ahead. On the side of the wooden desk was a heavy brass crank, and below the boy's figure, a complex locking mechanism resembling a bank vault dial. "What were you working on, Grandpa?" Oliver whispered, running his fingers over the cold metal gears. Knowing he was completely out of his depth, Oliver took several high-resolution photos of the automaton and sent them to an antique dealer he found online who specialized in 19th-century mechanical devices. Her name was Sophia Lambert. Sophia arrived the next morning. She was a sharply dressed woman in her late 40s, carrying a leather appraisal kit. From the moment she stepped into the basement, Oliver watched her carefully. When she saw the automaton, her breath hitched, just for a fraction of a second, before her face smoothed into a mask of professional indifference. "It's a fascinating piece of parlor entertainment," Sophia said, donning a pair of white cotton gloves and tracing the boy's mechanical arm. "Late 1800s, perhaps Swiss. It's heavily damaged, unfortunately. The mainspring is likely shattered, and the cipher lock on the base is seized." "What's it worth?" Oliver asked, leaning against a wooden crate. Sophia sighed, packing up her magnifying loupe. "In this condition? It's a novelty. Restoration would cost thousands. I have a client who collects macabre Victorian items. I could offer you $2,000 for it, to take it off your hands." Oliver's eyes narrowed. He remembered the slight gasp she made when she first saw it. He remembered Grayson's desperate rush to buy the building. Everyone was trying to hustle him. "2,000, Oliver repeated casually. "That's funny. I showed the pictures to a professor of horology at Penn State last night. He told me the gearing sequence looks like the work of Pierre-Jacques Droz. If it's authentic, it belongs in a museum in Neuchâtel, and it's worth roughly $500,000. Oliver was bluffing. He hadn't spoken to anyone else, but Sophia's reaction told him everything he needed to know. Her jaw tightened, and a flash of genuine panic crossed her eyes. "5,000, she said quickly. "Cash. Right now." "Get out of my shop, Sophia," Oliver said, pointing toward the stairs. "You're a fool, Hayes," she hissed, her professional veneer shattering. "You don't know what you're playing with. That machine isn't just a toy." She grabbed her bag and stormed up the stairs. Oliver locked the front door behind her, his heart hammering against his ribs. "You don't know what you're playing with." He rushed back down to the basement. If the automaton wasn't just a toy, what was it? He began tearing through his grandfather's cluttered back office, searching for anything related to the machine. After hours of tossing out old receipts and schematic drawings of grandfather clocks, he found it. A small, leather-bound journal, hidden inside a hollowed-out pendulum weight. The pages were filled with Benjamin's frantic, cramped handwriting. It wasn't a diary. It was a manual. Oliver rushed the journal down to the basement and set it next to the automaton. He flipped through the pages until he found a detailed sketch of the brass dial located at the base of the machine. Beneath the sketch was a cryptic phrase. "The truth of the city lies not in its height, but in its foundation. 1871. 1871, Oliver muttered. He knelt in front of the heavy brass dial. He spun it right to 1, left to 8, right to 7, left to 1. Click. A heavy metallic thud echoed through the basement. The locking mechanism disengaged. Oliver slowly turned the large brass crank on the side of the machine. For a terrifying second, it resisted, groaning under the weight of decades of rust. Then, something inside snapped loose. The machine sprang to life. It was horrifying and beautiful all at once. The mechanical boy's head jolted up, its glass eyes seeming to focus directly on Oliver. The internal gears whirred and clicked in a frantic symphony of brass and steel. The boy's arm moved, dipping the dry quill into a brass inkwell, and began to write on a blank piece of parchment fixed to the desk. Oliver watched in stunned silence as the mechanical arm swept back and forth, tracing perfectly cursive letters. When the whirring stopped and the boy's head bowed once more, Oliver stepped forward, shining his flashlight onto the parchment. Written in faded brown ink that must have been sitting inside the automaton's reservoir for 50 years were 2 words: "Look deeper." Before Oliver could process the message, a loud pneumatic hiss sounded from beneath the desk. The heavy wooden panel forming the side of the desk violently sprang open, revealing a hidden compartment lined in velvet. Inside the compartment lay 3 items. First, a heavy, ornate iron skeleton key. Second, a stack of United States Treasury bearer bonds, completely unregistered, with a face value of $1 million. And third, a thick, black ledger book with the Caldwell Holdings corporate logo stamped onto the cover. Oliver's hands shook as he picked up the ledger. He opened the first page. It was a meticulous, handwritten record of bribes, extortion, and forged property deeds dating back 40 years. It detailed exactly how Richard Caldwell's father had stolen the land beneath the entire Alderney district from the city's working-class families, using targeted arson and corrupt judges. His grandfather hadn't just kept a clock shop. Benjamin Hayes had been hoarding the ultimate blackmail material. This is why Grayson wants the building, Oliver realized, the terrifying truth washing over him. They don't care about the real estate. They know the ledger is in here. Suddenly, the heavy wooden floorboards above his head creaked. Oliver froze. The shop was closed. The front door was deadbolted. Another footstep echoed from the first floor, heavy and deliberate. Then the sound of glass shattering. Someone had broken in. Oliver killed his flashlight, plunging the basement into pitch blackness. He slipped the bearer bonds and the ledger into his jacket, gripping the heavy iron key in his fist like a weapon. The power that changed everything wasn't just wealth. It was leverage, and the people upstairs were willing to kill for it. The heavy basement door at the top of the stairs slowly squealed open, and a harsh beam of a tactical flashlight cut through the dark. "We know you're down there, Hayes," a rough voice called out. "Make it easy on yourself." Oliver pressed his back against the cold stone foundation, his mind racing. His inheritance wasn't a gift, it was a war. The beam of the tactical flashlight sliced through the dusty air, sweeping across the crates just inches from where Oliver crouched. He held his breath, his knuckles white around the heavy iron key. There were 2 of them, heavy-set men in dark windbreakers, their boots crunching on broken glass as they descended the wooden stairs. "Check the back," the lead thug growled, pulling a suppressed pistol from his waistband. Grayson said the kid is probably hiding under a desk, crying. Oliver knew he couldn't fight armed men. He needed a distraction, and he needed an exit. His eyes darted around the pitch-black basement, his memory mapping the space. 5 feet to his left was a massive, partially dismantled grandfather clock, a heavy oak piece leaning precariously against a support pillar. Above it hung a rack of iron pendulum weights. Moving with agonizing slowness, Oliver slid a glass jar of highly flammable clock-cleaning solvent from a nearby shelf. He tossed it hard toward the bottom of the stairs. Crash! The sharp sound of shattering glass echoed like a gunshot. Both men whipped around, their flashlight beams darting toward the noise. "Over there!" one shouted, rushing forward. As the first man's boots hit the puddle of slick, oily solvent, his legs flew out from under him. He hit the stone floor with a sickening thud, his flashlight rolling away into the dark. In that split second of chaos, Oliver lunged. He didn't go for the men. He grabbed the heavy wooden casing of the leaning grandfather clock and shoved it with all his might toward the support pillar. The oak casing toppled, smashing into the rack of iron pendulums. A cascade of heavy metal rained down, striking the second man and burying the stairs in hundreds of pounds of debris. The men yelled in pain and confusion, trapped behind the wreckage. Oliver didn't wait. He sprinted toward the rear foundation wall. When he was a teenager, his grandfather had drunkenly boasted that the shop was built over an old, Prohibition-era smuggling route, a tunnel that connected to the city's underground storm drains. Oliver ran his hands frantically along the cold, damp stones until his fingers brushed against cold iron. It was a heavy grate, secured by an ancient, rust-covered padlock. He looked at the ornate iron key in his hand. Oliver will know what to do with the time he is given. He jammed the key into the padlock and twisted. The internal tumblers groaned, resisting for a terrifying moment before yielding with a sharp click. Oliver ripped the grate open, dove into the narrow dirt tunnel, and pulled the iron cover shut behind him, just as a bullet sparked against the stone wall where his head had been. He crawled for what felt like miles in the suffocating darkness, the smell of mildew and wet earth filling his lungs. When he finally pushed open a secondary grate, he tumbled out into a rain-slicked alleyway, gasping for air. He was 3 blocks away from the shop. Oliver staggered to his feet, pulling his jacket tight against the freezing rain. He patted his chest. The bearer bonds and the ledger were still there. He didn't go to the police. Grayson had confidently declared the city would take the building, implying Caldwell Holdings had the local authorities firmly in their pocket. Instead, Oliver walked to a cheap, neon-lit motel on the edge of the interstate and paid for a room in cash. Once inside, he locked the door, drew the stained curtains, and threw the black ledger onto the bed. He needed to know exactly what he was holding. Oliver spent the next 4 hours reading through 40 years of corporate sins. Richard Caldwell hadn't just bribed zoning officials. He had orchestrated hostile takeovers, ruined lives, and ordered the arson of 3 historic buildings to clear lots for his high-rises. Benjamin Hayes had documented every transaction, every payoff, every dirty secret with the meticulous precision of a watchmaker. But it was the entry from 2 weeks ago, just days before Benjamin's death, that made Oliver's blood run cold. Payment cleared. Vanguard trust account ending in 4409. Recipient, D. Hayes. Service, asset vulnerability consultation. Oliver stared at the page, the letters blurring as a wave of nausea washed over him. D. Hayes. David. His own brother. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together. David's smugness at the lawyer's office, his pristine Vanguard portfolio, entirely managed by Caldwell Holdings' shell companies. David hadn't just inherited wealth, he had been paid off. David had sold their grandfather out, providing Caldwell with the old man's financial vulnerabilities, including the unpaid tax lien. David had orchestrated the seizure of the shop to ensure the ledger would be buried forever beneath a luxury shopping centre. "You bastard," Oliver whispered to the empty room. The betrayal cut deeper than the threat on his life. His family hadn't just laughed at his inheritance, they had set a trap for him. Oliver looked at the stack of unregistered bearer bonds. $1 million. It was enough to flee the country, start over somewhere quiet and never look back. He could let Caldwell have the shop. He could let David win. But Oliver thought of his grandfather, sitting alone in the dark, meticulously building that automaton, guarding a truth that the city needed to hear. He thought of the smug look on Grayson's face. Oliver picked up his phone. He wasn't going to run. He was going to break the clock. The central concourse of 30th Street Station was a cathedral of marble and brass, echoing with the hurried footsteps of thousands of morning commuters. It was the perfect place for a meeting. Too public for a quiet murder. Too loud for hidden microphones. Oliver sat on a polished wooden bench beneath the massive departure board, sipping a black coffee. He looked terrible. His clothes were wrinkled, his knuckles bruised, and he hadn't slept in 2 days. But his mind was razor sharp. At exactly 9 a.m., 3 men approached. Victor Grayson led the pack, his bespoke suit immaculate, though his eyes darted nervously around the terminal. Beside him walked Richard Caldwell, a septuagenarian billionaire with a face like carved granite and a predatory aura that commanded immediate silence. And trailing just behind them, refusing to make eye contact, was David. Oliver stood up, dropping his coffee cup into a nearby trash can. "I see you brought the whole board of directors, even the newest consultant," he glared at his brother. David flinched but tried to maintain his arrogant posture. "Stop being an idiot, Ollie. You're in way over your head. Give Mr. Caldwell what he wants, and we can all walk away from this." "Walk away?" Oliver chuckled humorlessly. "You sold out Grandpa for a Vanguard portfolio, Dave. You practically handed them the wrecking ball." Caldwell stepped forward, raising a hand to silence David. The billionaire's voice was a low, gravelly rasp. "I don't have time for family squabbles, Mr. Hayes. Your grandfather was a thorn in my side for 30 years. He was a paranoid pack rat who thought he could play God with my city. Grayson tells me you found his insurance policy." "I found the ledger," Oliver said, patting a thick manila envelope tucked under his arm. "And the bearer bonds he extorted from you." "Keep your voice down," Grayson hissed, glancing at a pair of transit police officers walking past. "Here is how this concludes," Caldwell said, pulling a cashier's check from his breast pocket. "You hand over the ledger, you keep the bonds, and I am giving you a check for $5 million. Tax-free. You sign over the deed to the shop, and you disappear. If you refuse, my men will not be as clumsy as they were last night." Oliver looked at the check. $5 million. Added to the bonds, it was generational wealth. It was everything his brother had sacrificed his soul for. Oliver slowly reached out and took the check. He inspected it, then looked at David. "Is this what it costs to buy a brother these days? Seems a little cheap." Before anyone could react, Oliver tore the cashier's check cleanly in half, letting the pieces flutter to the marble floor. Caldwell's face turned violently purple. "You stupid, arrogant little boy. You think you can destroy me? I own the judges. I own the police. I own this city. You own the dirt, Richard," Oliver said, stepping right into the billionaire's personal space. "But Grandpa owned the time, and your time just ran out." Oliver tossed the manila envelope onto the bench. Grayson lunged for it, ripping it open. He pulled out a thick stack of papers and stared at them. The blood drained from Grayson's face. "Mr. Caldwell," Grayson stammered, his hands shaking. It's just photocopies of clock schematics. It's garbage." Caldwell whipped his head back to Oliver, his eyes blazing with murderous intent. "Where is it?" "The iron key in the automaton didn't just open a tunnel," Oliver said, a cold smile spreading across his face. "It was the master key to a private lockbox at the First Pennsylvania Depository. I paid them a visit at 6 a.m. this morning." Oliver took a step back, raising his voice so it carried over the noise of the commuters. The original ledger, along with 50 pages of forged property deeds, went directly to Sarah Jenkins, the senior investigative reporter at the Chronicle. And the bearer bonds? I handed those over to a contact at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division an hour ago. They were very interested in unregistered federal securities tied to your corporate accounts. David panicked, grabbing Oliver's arm. "Ollie, what did you do? My accounts are tied to those holdings. If they freeze Caldwell's assets, I lose everything." "You already lost everything, Dave," Oliver said, shoving his brother away. "You just didn't realize it." "You're bluffing!" Caldwell snarled, though a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. "You wouldn't surrender $1 million in bonds just to spite me." "I don't care about the money," Oliver said quietly. "I care about the shop." Right on cue, the heavy glass doors of the station's eastern entrance swung open. Half a dozen men and women wearing windbreakers with bold yellow FBI lettering rushed into the concourse, accompanied by local state troopers. They moved with terrifying speed, cutting through the crowd directly toward Caldwell's group. "Richard Caldwell!" a lead agent shouted, flashing a badge. "You are under arrest for racketeering, extortion, and tax evasion. Place your hands behind your back." Grayson tried to run, but a trooper slammed him against a marble pillar, cuffing him instantly. Caldwell stood frozen, the reality of his destroyed empire crashing down on him as cold steel clicked around his wrists. David stood completely paralyzed, his phone suddenly buzzing uncontrollably in his pocket as his brokers frantically tried to reach him regarding frozen accounts. He looked at Oliver, his eyes wide with a desperate plea for help. Oliver just turned his back and walked away into the crowd. 6 months later, 42 Alderney Street was no longer a decaying eyesore. Oliver had used the $50,000 from an exclusive interview with the Chronicle to pay off the tax lien and hire contractors. The brickwork was power-washed, the gold leaf lettering restored, and the interior smelled of fresh pine and polished brass. Caldwell Holdings had filed for bankruptcy, the massive glass towers next door caught in endless litigation. Behind the gleaming front counter, hundreds of clocks ticked in perfect harmonious unison, and sitting proudly in the center of the front display window was the mechanical boy. It had been fully restored, its intricate brass gears clicking rhythmically as its arm moved back and forth. Oliver stood on the sidewalk, watching the automaton write its endless loop. He smiled, pulling the heavy rusted iron key from his pocket and tossing it lightly in the air. His grandfather hadn't left him nothing. He had left him the power to dismantle an empire, piece by piece, gear by gear. He had given him the ultimate gift, a future. Did Oliver's grandfather leave the ultimate revenge, or just a ticking time bomb? If you loved this story of betrayal, hidden wealth, and ultimate justice, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who loves a massive plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss out on our next real-life mystery. What would you do for $1 million?